Hello and welcome everybody. This episode we are calling Manifesto Pick and Mix. And we've also got a guest who's going to help us go through them. We've got some clips as well. Welcome, Marion.
Hello. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than this. This is the place to be.
Fabulous.
That's good, because we'll be very upset if you leave before it's all finished, you know, the way that some politicians do.
We are going to have a look at the Independence Party's manifestos. We've done a collection of what we could find, and the first one is the ISP. Now, you would think you could just go online and Google party manifestos and up where they would come, but they don't. So the only thing I could find on the ISP was a couple of tweets. This is the bits of one of those tweets that I thought, yeah, I could live with. So abstentionism from Westminster, anti-free ports, and putting independence first.
So ISP, there's just Colette Walker standing, isn't there?
That's, as far as I know, just Colette.
Well, you've got to, give her due, actually. Brave woman.
Small party, got to start somewhere.
To be fair, I mean, they have put up candidates in different elections. It's not the first time they've put candidates up, but to go for a first past the post voting deserves a bit of respect, if nothing else.
Yeah. And it's experience, I suppose, of going through the process. So, but I think perhaps a bit more on the manifesto side definitely would be helpful.
Yeah.
Next one, Scottish Greens. Now, quite a lot on here that I did like, but again, you click Greens manifesto, nothing comes up that says, here's our manifesto. So what I've done is I've put jigsaws together, like pieces of tweets, bits of clips here and there, and things they've said on debates. These are all the bits I like.
Well, I like them. I certainly like them. Reading down through them quite quickly, I certainly like those. Have we got any clips from the Green Party? We
do. The first one, you see there, no new oil and gas drilling. That's one where perhaps they depart a little from some of the other parties, but they put out a short video, which I think is extremely good.
I have to say, I haven't seen the manifesto for the Greens.
Well, join the club.
Yeah, I would have thought that it would have been messaged to members, but I haven't seen it, and I just assumed, maybe wrongly, that it hadn't actually been published. But
that could be you might be right. Yeah, it could be right.
Well, in that case, this is our guess of what we think is in it that we like.
Just in my head, you're thinking, well, the oil and gas companies in the northeast are looking at a sinking reserve of oil and gas, and the people can pull out. People have pulled out, and their jobs there are jobs in oil, gas, and other parts of the world that those people will escape to if they're not engaged by the Scottish government and by their employers into retraining and stuff like that, into renewables. And what I would think needs to be done is an overt statement by the Scottish government saying that the oil and gas companies will be held to account if they don't make that just transition happen for their employees.
It would be good, but two things. First of all, I think, well, what could the Scottish government actually do? I mean, as a an aspiration, I'm completely with you. I mean, make those oil companies responsible. They've taken a hell of a lot of profit out of the North Sea over the years, but I'm not clear about what actually could be done. And then the second thing, but it joins on from that, is it's energy, it's reserve. The UK government would have to be the ones who are doing it. And I'm not sure that even the UK government can do that much when it's companies.
Is that going to be in the Greens manifesto, do you think? And if so, is it
I don't know that it is. Is this just me being... Today, I feel very idealistic. I woke up feeling very idealistic.
If you want to do a Robertson's manifesto, we can stick it on the end. Carrying on looking through the Greens ones, I thought there was an interesting one, this idea of banning coal, oil and gas companies from advertising, but almost ties in a bit about what you were saying. This one I like, putting the UK government under immediate, sustained and unrelenting pressure to devolve power to hold constitutional referendums. I thought it was quite interesting that they are highlighting that after the pasting that Lorna gets every time because she once said something about independence not being a red line. She put it very well, I thought, on the debate.
Now, we can set out a vision for Scotland that is fantastic. We have huge resources in Scotland. Wind energy, other renewable energy. I used to work in offshore renewables myself. So I can tell you, when we get those supply chains going, the turbine I built was built with steel from Liberty Steel in Motherwell. It was assembled in the Port of Dundee and is now run and operated in Orkney. We need to scale up those supply chains and create a brilliant future for the people in Scotland. Now, I think we can do that better as an independent Scotland. And the question is, you said it yourself, it's for the people of Scotland to decide. So will you respect our democratic mandate and allow us a referendum on independence? Will you revoke the Internal Market Act that overrules devolution? And will you respect the Sewell Convention and not pass laws against our will?
Good for Lorna, she got it. She was on fire there.
Good to see that really up front.
Yeah. And then drug decriminalisation is common to a few of them. Taxing the super wealthy, though, this is something that we think only appears in the Greens manifesto.
The idea that he tries to project that we're all in this together is simply not true. Working people have borne the brunt of cuts because the Tories, their austerity policies, mean that they have been cutting taxes for the wealthiest and trying to balance the books by cutting public services and the money we need in Scotland, that capital money we need to build better roads, railroads and hospitals. It is disingenuous of Douglas Ross to pretend that times are hard. Times are not hard for the super wealthy. They've made out like bandits since COVID. Their wealth has doubled and tripled. What the Scottish Greens would do is make sure that those super wealthy pay their fair share. We propose a tax on the super wealthy or have more than assets than £3.4 million, which would raise billions and billions of pounds for the Treasury, which we could invest in those building schools and hospitals and, of course, in that green transition.
She's very good, yeah, definitely. Go on. I must admit, I heard those figures and thought, well, if it starts at 3.4 million, which is a very particular number, there'll obviously be some reason for it, and it will create billions and billions. So that strikes me that that must be a calculation for the UK as a whole.
That's a really good point, actually, because a number of the clips that the Greens have put out, they are talking about UK level. I suppose it's a UK election to Westminster, but they're making an argument to a UK-wide audience, which jarred a little bit with me. But
well, we've said that more than once in these election broadcasts we're doing, haven't we? You hear someone talking, and I'm thinking, yeah, but that's devolved. That's to do with Holyrood. It's not to do with. It's completely fair to bring up what what Scottish government has or hasn't been doing. I don't mean that's not should be kept out of it. But then it gets very difficult to follow the argument when it's a UK-wide election.
Alba is the next one we looked at. Now, again, they don't have something that's called Here is our manifesto. What they have is a website that's got policies on it. I'm assuming that is effectively their manifesto, but quite a few of those policies can only happen if we're independent. So again, in the context of a Westminster UK election.
Oh, but it is useful. I mean, it's useful for us, isn't it? I mean, everyone in Scotland knows what the background to that is, and no one will be voting for them in England. So, fair enough. But it's a little bit different with the Greens because there's the English and Welsh Green Party. And
again, they put out what I thought was a very well presented bill. There were two particular parts I thought were really good. One is something that we've all spoken about, which is where is our cut of all this use of our resources? Where is Scotland's cut?
I know where it is. It's in the Treasury.
Oh, yes, and I think you could be right there.
Profits swallowed up by international capital, the revenue taken by Westminster, leaving ordinary Scots behind to pay the bills.
Our country is being governed for them, not for us.
And these aren't problems with simple solutions. They require real change.
And it's time to send a message. It's time to say that we have had enough of this system that isn't working for us. That we will not pause the aspirations of the nation for self-entitled politicians at Westminster who don't care about us, who don't live here, who don't send their children to our schools, who cannot possibly represent our interests. It's time to make a stand about the nation we were, the nation we are, and the nation we will be.
We need a party with a plan. And Alba is the party with a plan. To use the ballot box so that each election is an opportunity for the people of Scotland to choose their own future.
I thought that was it's kind of like the language. It's quite evocative and
There was nothing there that I would disagree with in what they were saying in terms of...
Well, not in terms of what they're saying. I mean, I don't think there's anything there that I disagree with in terms of if those are their policies.
Again, these are the ones that I like of the ones I could find. But it's interesting that they've got UBI as well. The Greens had that. And this public energy company, and although we know there are issues with that, we've done a whole Maybe's Eye episode about it, a minimum 20% public share in all offshore wind energy projects run by public energy company, that is way beyond anything that GB Energy is promoting, which is just going to be a privately owned investment vehicle for the private sector.
Yes, indeed. Having a public energy company that owns it, as we've said in other podcasts, Scottish Government isn't allowed to own energy production. However, I suppose it could happen. Local authorities are allowed to do that, so it could kind of be shunted sideways. And
on free ports, is there not something being talked about just now about how to extract us from our free port commitments so that it wouldn't preclude us rejoining the EU?
Free ports that do exist in Europe, but they're publicly owned, whereas ours are privately corporation owned.
Could they be bought out by the public purse?
Well, I suppose it's always possible, that kind of thing. Or then it becomes not very likely if it takes a huge amount of money. But I do think there's a lot to be said. I mean, I would want all our independence parties to do this now, to be saying, after we're independent, we will be supporting taking them over as public companies. I'd like them to be saying that about land reform, and saying up front,
yes, we'll
be looking to take land back into public ownership or splitting up big estates. So we're telling you now.
Oh yeah.
I just think we should just be on the front foot with that.
I think you're right, Marlene, definitely. Transparent, upfront. I think it's only going to build momentum if we start talking positively and radically about the way that we want to run our country. I think these are the kinds of things that we're dying to hear about. It's like an open goal for some of these parties that are pro-independence.
Also, it means we're perhaps less likely to get sued by various companies if we said, well, we told you up front if we were independent, it was going to be nationalised. Let's have a look at the another section from that Alba film.
Getting control of Scotland's resources so we can use them to benefit the people of Scotland.
This is Grangemouth Refinery, a symbol of this campaign and the refinery that Alba are battling to save. It symbolises Scotland because after half a century of oil and gas in massive quantities, we've become the only country with such a bounty to get relatively poorer. And what's going to happen to Scotland's renewables? Unless we control that resource with a public share in every field, a community share at every landfall point, then we'll have the same story as oil and gas.
The Westminster government will get the riches, and the benefits will bypass the people of Scotland again. So Alba stand for Scottish control of Scottish resources, so we cease to become the land of fuel poverty amid energy plenty. We stand for a future where the destiny of our country is decided by the people who live here.
This is one that I thought Marlene can maybe explain this to us, because when I was looking at these the other day, I was going, well, I agree with we don't want new oil and gas. And I thought, but I kind of agree with we want a refinery. And I thought, well, what do we want a refinery for if we're not drilling new oil and gas? Now, Marlene, class what, as she's just declared herself to be.
Sorry.
Explain it to us.
When you said that, I knew you were thinking about, well, if we're moving to renewables and, why the need for a big refinery. But I mean, everyone all over the world needs to have the plant to make the building blocks for pharmaceuticals. So Grangemouth, I don't know if it's still working, but they certainly had. There's a big ethylene plant there. So ethylene is one of the building blocks for loads and loads of more complicated chemical molecules. And it ends up being part of pharmaceutical industry. There's other things, plastics. We can say we don't want those things, and we do want to move away from them. But in the meantime, there's going to be a transition. So if you've got Grangemouth as a centre for that, for Scotland, it'll be full of, inventive, clever chemists will come up with new ways of creating those building blocks that then hopefully then you don't need to depend on oil. And eventually that will have to be the case. Yeah. I mean, there are ways of doing it, but at the moment it takes a lot of energy to do it. But maybe that doesn't matter if you've got a large supply of renewable energy on your doorstep.
Thank you. That was good. I mean, I'm actually going to go to there's a hustings in Alloa on Tuesday, and of course Alloa is the constituency that Grangemouth is in, and it's been contested by SNP, also Kenny McGaskill from Alapa, and Eva Comrie as an independent. So the last one I thought was quite interesting as well, and this hasn't appeared in anybody else's, recognising the Gaelic Act, and that was around the sort of promotion of the languages, our cultural heritage, which again, don't disagree with that at all. Freely owned public transport in there too, which is on my list. So this is SSP. Now, I have to say, of all the parties, theirs was the one that you could Google, where's your manifesto? And there it is. And it's line by line. Here's what's in our manifesto. And there's links for more information under each of them. So by far the best presentation. I don't understand why these guys don't get more votes. I mean, what they say is, I don't disagree with anything they say. And they've got by far the best way of putting it across. A lot of what I would call, in fact, we described it in our last episode as real proper socialism. Ending poverty pay and ending the discrimination against younger workers so that the minimum wage applies to them all. Ending 0 hours contracts, so you're guaranteed minimum 16 hours. Fighting fuel poverty, an emergency program to retrofit homes and public buildings. Creating a national energy company. There's another one wanting a national energy company for people, not profit, and a democratic public ownership of energy, free public transport, windfall tax on pandemic profiteers. That's an interesting one. And repealing anti-trade union laws. 4 days a week on 5 days pay, universal basic income. And again, the Greens had UBI. Ban fire and rehire on worse conditions. 100,000 new council homes. None of the others have mentioned homes that I could see. Democratic public ownership of landed estates. Corporate farms, increase local food production. That's an interesting one. National care service free at the point of use. Address the mental health crisis, decriminalise drugs. I think Alba had that one as well. Withdraw from NATO and remove nuclear weapons. So a very, very comprehensive list of very aspirational stuff there. The one bit that perhaps isn't is, how much is it all going to cost?
It's always easy to come up with the aspirational ideas when you don't have to, you're never going to be in a position of costing them, which is not a reason for, not doing it, actually. I mean, I read those ones, and I mean, some of these things, I almost think, if they were made a bit less particular, a bit more general, actually would be things that you'd want to put into a constitution, like those ones about, a universal basic income could easily be part of a constitutional as an aspiration. Things about how you treat the working population in terms of, trade union laws and decent pay, that can also be part of it. So I read that and the others, and I felt quite pleased with Scotland, actually.
This is Richie Benton from the Scottish Socialist Party. I'm proud of the fact that we've got candidates standing in Rutherglen and Glasgow East as socialist MPs who will remain on the wage of a worker and reject corruption and careerism, which infests politics. This general election sees two men fighting to become the next Tory Prime Minister. We don't want to leave people with the choices of different colours of Toryism. We want socialist change. We want, for example, a £15 an hour minimum wage to end the crime where 1.3 million people in Scotland literally cannot afford to live. We want public ownership of energy and free public transport in order to combat the fact that climate change means May was the hottest May in history. So we're a party that stand up for the working class and for socialism, not like all the parties of the rich who stand up for big business. Vote Scottish Socialist Party for socialist change and an end to different choices of Toryism.
Why should we have to choose between two colours of Tory? What a great line.
It's great. It's really great line, that, isn't it? Yeah, I like that one. As I was taking on board a bit more about what's in those, Fiona, I ended up thinking, well, there's 4 parties, Alba, Greens, ISP, Scottish Socialists, and they're all progressive, left-leaning in Scotland, for Scotland. we haven't even got as far as SNP, and they're also progressive and left-wing. I just felt, wow, that's just fantastic, isn't it? And I also thought, well, once we are independent, I'm going to be spoilt for choice about who to vote for, which I never have been in the past. It's always been, Labour when I voted Labour, and SNP while I've been voting SNP. And I thought, well, it's just great. It just says such a lot about the kind of country that we are, but we're not free to really express and develop.
I don't think there are many other European countries quite made up in the same way as we are. And I think we ought to be proud of that.
Right.
We are unashamedly what we are. And we've come from this position of left of centre for a very long time, and we oughtn't to hide it. We should really make it work for us as a people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I suppose, just to be fair, sort of walking back a bit here, because it is the Scottish Conservative Party, and they do get quarter or a bit more of votes cast. So, it's not like it's the whole, what I said, it's not like what I said is the whole story, but it's about 3/4 or 2/3 of the story.
But if they were an actual Scottish Tory party, I think that would be legitimate because they're a branch office of the UK party. I mean, the one thing you said there, you'll be spoilt for choice when we're independent. You won't have to be, because we'll have proportional representation, I would imagine. So actually, I could imagine that would be quite a rainbow parliament. Given those choices, they might all get a space, which would be fabulous.
Sure. Yeah, I did have to start to look through the Tory one, and I just wilted after a bit, and it was full of huge pages that was just a Union Jack, and then there was a plan, we'll do this. And I mean, I presume that what goes through my head when I saw that is the same as what a lot of people must be thinking, which was, why haven't you already bloody done this then? I gave up with it.
Is there anything Scottish about this manifesto? No?
Not that I saw. No. I mean, it's a long, it's I don't know, 80 pages or something, but there isn't anything specific. It's just a plan for working, a plan for NHS.
In a way, it doesn't really matter what's in it, because they're toast, aren't they? They're not going to, they haven't got hope in hell. But have we seen a reform manifesto?
I'll tell you one thing, though, I noticed this morning, because on our last election podcast, Fiona, I was mentioning that possibility of what was being referred to as a crossover point, where reform might get more votes. I mean, they're never going to get more seats, but they might get more votes than. This morning there was a YouGov poll came out.
That's right.
And Tories were something like 17 or 18%, and reform was something like 18, 19%. So they had actually crossed over. And of course, the Tory spokespeople come on, and these polls come out every day. It's just one poll, which is completely true. I mean, it might be a complete outlier. On the other hand, if there is going to be a crossover, that is what we'll be seeing. We'll be seeing more of that. And it's remarkable.
And momentum is a very powerful thing once the big roller starts rolling.
Yeah, but of course, needless to say, Mr. Farage has jumped on that with his usual, eye for an opportunity, and has been saying on the media rounds this morning, he's the main opposition leader now, and he's demanding a debate with Keir Starmer, just between him and Keir Starmer.
Oh my God. In the debates he's been in so far, and I've only seen little clips of them, he's been rubbish. He hasn't come across with any presence at all.
Stephen Flynn made mincemeat out of him, and he just was left there with his jaw slack.
Yes.
Stephen Flynn's been magnificent in these. He really.
Yeah, he is. Stephen Flynn and Kate Forbes are doing a really good job, and John Swinney does a bit of a different kind of job. I'm not sure myself that it's quite what's needed. But anyway, we'll see. Still another. A bit of me goes, could we not just vote now?
Do an online poll.
It's just an online poll. It's just too much to carry on doing this. And can we not just kind of do it now? Because we all know what we're going to vote, don't we? And then I thought, well, no, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah. As long as people do vote, and you've told them many times, just to make sure that they've got all their ID and stuff like that. So,
where does that leave us then? Are you feeling more like optimistic or more of a momentum kind of happening than, say, if you look back to last week, when however you were feeling then? How about yourself, Marion?
I started at a very low point. When I first heard, and I mentioned this to you, Fiona, my heart just sank. And I think it was because I thought small parties will really struggle finding the funding and maybe the bodies, the energy to get out there to campaign. And then the fact that the Butte House Agreement was dismantled. I feel that from what I've seen and heard and listening to other pundits and commentators, that slowly but surely the SNP are getting their act together in messaging and communication, which I think is vitally important. And they're wheeling out Kate Forbes. The clips I've seen so far, she's performing the way that we know Kate Forbes performs, which is, I'm going to talk through you if you're going to talk through me, Fiona Bruce. And the Greens, I'm certain that they're doing as much as they possibly can with the small means at their disposal. Yeah.
So that sounds like you've gone from maybe a 2 out of 10 to what?
Maybe 5 or a 6.
Oh, wow.
But I think, maybe you've shared the same view as me, that this is so dispiriting to see the state of our politics in the decrepitude and the corruptness that it is. I'm talking about the UK sort of generally, but not in Scotland. I think that we have such a big heart in this country. Surely to God we've got the sense and the intellect to be able to see through the lies and deceit of Labour. That there's a better way, and we ought to be just expressing our voting preferences in the way that we can, because we have more choice here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Fiona, what about yourself? Marks out of 10 from last week?
I'm going to say 6.5. I'm getting it the extra half point because of that point you made, Marlene, about looking across these manifestos of parties that 2 of them won't even share a platform together, and there's a huge common area that we could all get behind in that. We haven't seen the SNP one yet, but I'm pretty sure there'll be an awful lot of common ground there as well. And it just makes me think that maybe there's more that unites us than divides us, if that's not a party slogan.
Yeah. I don't know if I probably was down to about 2 last week. When it started, I was so pissed off at Sunak for calling this election. So in my mind, it was going to be September. It's too soon. I mean, it's going to catch people on the hoof. But I do feel a bit more optimistic. I sort of feel there's a bit more of solid campaigning going on, for the kind of ideas that I'd like to see happening. So yeah, probably up myself up to a 6, maybe 6.5. And I saw today the most recent poll again, SNP and Labour neck and neck, Scotland at 36%. That's maybe a bit of evidence for what you were saying yourself, Marion, that the SNP have got themselves, sorted out a bit and getting a bit of momentum with some good people.
That was our roundup of the independence parties that aren't the SNP. We'll have a look at the SNP and the Labour Party manifesto.
During the launch speech, Mr. Swinney he repeatedly returned to saying what people want are politicians who tell you what their values are and then tell you what their policies are going to be based on those values. And that's what's been lacking of late. So let's listen to that little clip, because he does it really well in this little clip.
The future of the 2-child cap is a simple test. Are you in government to help children out of poverty, or are you so morally lost that you push kids into poverty? Our choice to abolish the cap is obvious, and it is driven by our values. Those values that demand the removal of the 2-child cap also drive the SNP on so many issues, not least nuclear weapons. We will demand an end to the obscene waste of billions of pounds on a new generation of weapons of mass destruction. And while we're talking about waste, SNP MPs will demand that the House of Lords is abolished. Our values, Scotland's choices. Elected government, not ermine-clad cronies. Lift the 2-child cap, not the cap on bankers' bonuses. Bairns, not bombs, and investment, not cuts. I believe those choices represent the values that most of us share. They are Scotland's values, and a vote for the SNP, a vote for this manifesto, is a vote for those values for Scotland.
I listened to John Swinney, speech at the launching the manifesto, and so I could think, oh, I'll go through and I'll get the main points out. And then I found a Sky video giving the main points in the SNP manifesto. So I thought, oh, good, I don't have to do it now. We'll just go through them sort of really quickly, and then we're going to come back to some of them. We noticed very early on that John Swinney had a list, doesn't he? He's got an ABC list, which is austerity, Brexit, and
cost of living
crisis. Well, he's added a fourth one to that, which is it's now ABCD, and D is for democracy. As they have promised, it's the first page of the manifesto: delivering Scottish independence, rejoining the EU, and I hadn't seen this in the manifesto, but they're also proposing to replace first past the post, so that's for general elections, with single transferable vote, which is definitely a good idea.
Yes, it is. Funnily enough, I'd just been listening to John Curtis at an event. It was on YouTube, and they were talking about essentially PR rather than first past the post. The parties that benefit from it tend to be the smaller ones. That's logical, isn't it? The ones that are squeezed out when it's essentially two big parties. They said what people have to realise is that might mean that some of your far-right Farage type parties will end up getting a vote that they wouldn't otherwise have got. And whilst people can then go, oh, we don't want that, actually that's a small price to pay, because there are some people who vote for that end of the spectrum.
I mean, whatever you might think of anyone who wants to vote for Nigel Farage, nevertheless, if they do want to vote for them, and the voting system can always squeezes them out, then those people have actually a fair enough reason for getting fed up with politics and
yes,
and feeling like their voice doesn't count. But the other big benefit, if we did away with first past the post, is that the big parties would have to cooperate. There would be alliances. There would be maybe not coalitions, but certainly alliances, the way there is in most other European countries. We're going to definitely come back to that one, especially about delivering Scottish independence. But we'll just carry on quickly. The next main point was about taxes, so full devolution of tax powers, maintaining the triple lock in pensions, and lowering the rate of VAT for hospitality and tourism. Again, that was another one I had noticed when I had a quick flick through the manifesto.
This is where I think it's difficult to get your head round some of these, because it's a Westminster election. So really they ought to be talking about reserved areas. But those are then areas that they have no power over to deliver. So you've kind of got to get your head around the fact that this isn't them saying we're going to maintain the triple lock on pensions. It's that they're going to campaign and support that view. They can't make it happen. But full devolution of tax powers, if you had that, then you could set the rate of that at whatever you liked. So it's kind of a mixture there of what you can do now, what you could press for, what you could do if you had these powers. I
mean, about lowering the rate of VAT for tourism, hospitality. I mean, there are parts of England and Wales that would benefit hugely from that as well. Wouldn't just be a benefit for Scotland. Next one, moving on to welfare, scrapping the 2-child benefit cap. Obviously, that's got to be scrapped in Westminster. Holyrood can't. Increase maternity pay and leave to 1 year. Decriminalise drugs for personal use. So there are support for some of those things in other UK parties. I mean, I think the Lib Dems are be talking about decriminalising drugs, haven't they?
That one is certainly one that would make a big impact in Scotland, because that then opens the door for Holyrood to put in a whole suite of treating it as a public health issue, which we know they want to do.
Yeah, indeed. So it's interesting. It's they've put it under welfare, isn't it? Because probably would have put it under health. Certainly could have been.
And the Tories will put it under justice as well.
Yeah. So a bill to protect the NHS from privatisation, boosting spending on the NHS, and saying to England and Wales, you would improve your health outcomes if you match Scotland's pay deals that we've given to NHS staff. So there's quite a lot in that. And I sort of noticed as she was going through, she was missing out some of the phrases that the First Minister used as he was talking about it. So he had up, NHS is not for sale. That's a bit of a stronger way of putting it. Immigration, devolve powers to create a migration system for Scotland, scrap the Rwanda scheme, reverse moves to stop overseas care workers bringing dependents with them.
Oh, that's a clumsy wording, isn't it? That may be reverse moves to stop them bringing people in. You think, so what are you saying?
Yes. Allow overseas care workers to bring dependents with them.
Yeah, exactly. That's about triple negatives in there, isn't it?
I think there must be, at least. And then the last one is more about foreign affairs, immediate ceasefire in Gaza, restoring foreign aid, scrapping the Trident nuclear deterrent, which again, the phrase that was used in the actual launch was, the one that we're quite familiar with up in Scotland, burns, not bombs.
Bombs, yeah.
Yeah. That was a sort of quick way through the main points that's there. Labour, of course, is not so keen on some of these. And so on debate night, BBC Scotland, Michael Mara was there. He's a Labour MSP. And he got asked a question by a young lad in the audience.
Would Keir Starmer give a Section 30 order to Scotland?
Keir Starmer said that there won't be a referendum, and he's not in favour of that.
Is that democratic?
The question was about Keir Starmer. I'm afraid that was the question I was asked, Richard. So there's a big debate, I think, about what is a mandate in this regard.
Show support for independence, you still will not give them a Section 30 order.
So no, there won't be a Section 30 order. That won't be approved.
So it's undemocratic.
If I can say to you at the moment, I think that when I'm out speaking to people, actually the relevance of this issue to many people at the moment is very, very low, I have to say, and it's at nowhere level. I understand there are people who are really passionate about it. I understand that.
My question was if it's voted for, though, not how it's feeling now.
I think I've answered that question. I think I've answered that question. There will not be a Section 30 order.
Just that's bringing back sort of flashes for me of some of the questions that were asked in the actual manifesto launch, clumsily dealt with, I think, there by Michael Mara.
Yes, although he did make it very clear that there wasn't going to be one.
Yeah, and I think that half the yes movement is also going, told you, because, that was the big difference between the conference motion when Humza was First Minister, when they decided that a majority of seats would lead to a negotiation with Westminster about independence. And Sweeney has rode back on that to talking about needing a referendum, which, although he hasn't actually used the phrase that I heard saying Section 30 order, that is the only way open to us to get one. And the answer has not been given, which is what happens when they say no. It's legitimate that you should ask a new government, this is the way we would like to do it because we think it's the best way to do it. But when they say no, what are you going to do then? And I don't know what that answer is now.
You see, I disagree with you that John Swinney's somehow rode back from what was agreed at that conference. I don't see that. I mean, what was agreed was about if we get a majority of seats, then we'll open negotiate. The word ask does not appear in it. He didn't use the word ask at the launch. And I noticed that he goes back to the fact that Holyrood has a majority of independent supporting MSPs. That's the mandate. Westminster has continually refuted it. And as far as I can see, his way of putting it now, his way of approaching it now is, we've already got the mandate. Westminster has been refuting it. This election is a way of putting more pressure, adding pressure to get them to come to negotiate about it. And now that there's going to be a change in government, well, very likely, and we're all going to put money on that, even though we're not Tory ministers and people who go and make bets about whether they... I thought it would be hard to resist that, wouldn't it? But, obviously shouldn't have done it. And he's saying, okay, so a new government, we're saying to them, here's the situation, mandate in Holyrood. We've got so many seats. Hopefully they'll be able to say we've won this election in Scotland. We want to open negotiations with you. So I don't see that as pulling back somehow. I know we kind of, hey folks, Fiona and I kind of don't quite see eye to eye on this one. So we have wee wrangles in the background, don't we?
We absolutely do, but we can disagree and still be friends, can't we?
Oh, absolutely.
So, I think it is to do with perception and
yeah,
what people, to an extent, you hear what you want to hear, don't you?
Well, I'll tell you what we could do now. We could have a look at what Kate Forbes said. She was,
Okay.
I think this is the one where she was on the Peston programme.
In the Scottish Parliament already, we had our last elections in 2021. There is currently a majority of seats in the Parliament of people who support independence. So we have that mandate in terms of support for independence. The point that we've made in our manifesto is that for those who believe in real change, and not just sort of shifting the deck chairs around as Labour would propose for Scotland, for those who believe in real change, there is an opportunity to acknowledge that in the upcoming election and to vote for a better future for Scotland. That is to vote for independence. Now, the language there indicates that we will start discussions with the UK government in order to provide the people of Scotland with a referendum, a means, an internationally recognised means for voting for independence itself. But our manifesto sets out the value of independence, of being able to do things differently. You take, for example, Labour's position on immigration. I would say in Scotland, there's a recognition of the economic benefits of immigration, but neither the Conservative nor Labour, who are going to form the next UK government, are in any way keen to support the positive case for immigration. And that's why we think that powers at a Scottish level are where we should be determining the decisions that matter most.
I think that answers quite a few of the points that were raised by journalists at the launch. But I think your other point, what happens when they say no, that's still there, and that's still got to be answered. I mean, I've never thought that Westminster was going to say, oh yes, okay, we'll start negotiating. They aren't going to do that. To me, it's the first move in a game of chess. Yeah. So you've moved your pawn 2 steps forward, and you're saying, yeah, what are you going to do now? And it will go on. Scottish government can make hay over any refusals that come their way. We get to the next Holyrood election, and I mean, personally, I think the Indy supporting parties have to work out a way of working together for that.
Yes,
to absolutely maximise the number of votes. And it's much easier to do it for Holyrood because, well, it's partly first past the post, but it's also proportional. So I think myself that it's going to be the result of the Holyrood election that will then enable ScotGov, hopefully will enable them to say we've got an even bigger mandate now for independence. Are you going to open negotiations? And if they don't at that point, then I think some of the ideas that at the moment are kind of off field a bit, some of those then maybe move to be more central.
One of the things that has not really been very well pushed back on, I think, as yet, is this false equivalence, so between votes for the SNP in a first past the post Westminster election forming pressure on the government. There were 8 of the 21 questions that were asked at John Swinney's launch were all essentially the same question, which was, well, if a majority of seats means you've got, well, they're using that to mean a mandate, then not getting a majority must mean that independence is off the table, and that's, that means you've not got a mandate. The difference is that in Holyrood, it's not just SNP seats that make up that plurality, whereas first past the post, it's only likely to be the SNP that gets any actual seats because of the system they use. They're saying the result of votes for one party means no, but the result of votes for more than one party means yes. So it's not the same thing. And you'd think if you're in a journalist, you've got one question to ask the First Minister, 7 people in front of you have already asked that question. Why would you ask it an 8th time? It's just the quality of the unionist press is just absolute despair. 7 of them asked a variation on, well, what's the point of this mandate? Your MPs can't do anything anyway. And I thought, is that not a really good argument for independence?
Yeah, exactly.
We know they can't do anything.
I know, exactly. I just wish it would just be nice if maybe after the 7th attempt, Mr. Swinney had said, good argument for independence here, kind of thing. But so I was just going to put up another couple of clips because one of the, the main focuses in SNP manifesto is about rejoining the EU. there's always questions and discussions about, oh yeah, but you join the EU, but then you leave your biggest customer down south, and it won't work, blah blah blah. So one is Kate Forbes again, and she's being challenged on the benefits for Scotland of rejoining the EU.
Economists have looked at your figures and your plans and have said that you rely on you getting back into the EU. Now, that is very unlikely to happen. You're not going to get that revenue you're expecting. And actually, if you were to leave the UK, economists are saying that will reduce your economic growth. So you're not even going to have the funds to try and support these public services like you're promising.
Well, let's unpack both of those figures, because they come from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which has obviously been very clear about the £18 billion worth of cuts that Labour and the Conservatives are proposing. But in terms of our figures, they've actually said that our estimate of about £30 billion in additional tax revenue by re-entering the EU is not unreasonably high. And we've set out our approach. We are unashamedly pro-European Union. And I'll remind you, when it comes to democracy, that a majority of people in Scotland voted to remain. And how did that go? So the IFS has set out that clearly. It also talks about the prospects of an independent country, using figures that are very much based on Scotland's position within the rest of the UK. We know that the UK runs a very unequal economy, with a lot of the activity concentrated in London and the South East. And what we say is, look to comparable other small European countries, see how they outperform the UK, and look at the prospects for what Scotland might be able to achieve. Access, for example, to the biggest single market in the world.
Yeah. She's so clear, isn't she, when she's explaining things?
She's so clear. She's so clear. I sort of think, does she practice in front of a mirror, or is it just like she's just got it? Basically, she's got it, and she can come out. So she mentioned in that clip the IFS Institute for Fiscal Studies, and what they've obviously had a look at the SNP's figures. But sort of separately from that, they also just look generally at how well the Scottish economy is doing. And there was a recent little exchange on BBC Scotland with a spokesman from the IFS, and he was just giving the IFS view on the Scottish economy.
I think the first thing to note is actually Scotland is one of the more better off regions of the UK. It's behind London and the southeast of England, but it's well ahead of the Midlands and north of England, not to mention Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland's got a broad-based economy, a relatively well-educated workforce, although of course oil and gas and associated activity onshore do loom much larger than they do in the rest of the UK. I think looking at growth recently, Scotland has very slightly outperformed growth in the rest of the UK over the last few years, at least once you adjust for lower population growth. So on a per person basis, Scotland's economy is slightly larger than before the pandemic, whilst in the rest of the UK it's very slightly lower.
When I heard that one, I thought, I'm surprised the BBC Scotland let that go out, actually, but maybe they were doing it live and they didn't have any. Oh, that's terribly cynical of me.
Smaller number of people doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Yes, indeed. Not you and me, of course, because
we're not economically active.
We're terribly busy and we're being hell of a productive, but we don't appear in those stats. I think we should probably write a wee paper for the IFS just to say, you ought to take into account the independence voluntary sector. I was also just having a wee look at what Labour have been saying, and the easiest way of looking at what they've been saying is to look at Mr. Starmer's first 6 steps. I noticed that they really like Union Jacks on their promotions, and they actually quite like Welsh Dragon. I've never seen a saltire on their promotions, and also I've never seen a Union Jack on their promotions in Scotland. Yeah, so I had a little look at the first steps, and then twigged that there's first steps for England and Wales, and then there's different first steps for Scotland.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So, first 6 steps, England and Wales, first 6 steps. Economic stability, cut NHS waiting times, a new border security command, set up Great British Energy, crack down on antisocial behaviour and recruit 6,500 new teachers. So that's England and Wales. Here's Scotland. Deliver economic stability, that's the same. cut NHS wages.
Even though the NHS is devolved in Scotland.
Yes, so that's also the same. But as you say, it's not within his power to do that, really. And then it gets to be different. So then the third one here is set up Great British Energy. After that, we've got make work pay. I think that to me is a daft kind of way of putting it. I had to go and look it up to find out what that meant. But basically, it's a reference to policies that they're going to do about cutting back on when 0 hours contracts can be used and the minimum wage. It's that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's the kind of policy you'd hope that a Labour Party would be putting in.
That's interesting, though, because make work pay was one of the arguments for universal credit.
Yes.
And, you know, having poor people much poorer than people in work. So it was,
and that was what came into my mind first when I read make work pay. I thought, oh, that's all that Tory stuff about making it difficult to be on benefits without, you know, you got to have 6 jobs and still go in and see someone every week and explain to them why you don't have 7 jobs. It's an interesting one to use, but to be fair to them, it does refer to their work condition policy. And then the fifth one, create jobs and opportunities for young people.
Not in England and Wales.
Well, not first. And again, you know, it's not the kind of thing that's really within their power to do that.
And also, you know, Scotland's approaching full employment. Our problem is that we've got huge vacancies in all sorts of sectors because of Brexit. Not that we've got a whole load of young people sitting around with no jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a weird one.
I know it is. And then number 6, maximise Scotland's influence.
To do what?
Have you noticed that he looks a bit gentler and he's got a little bit of a smile there, you know, compared to commanding.
Oh yeah, so he's definitely,
you know, Admiral on the bridge.
He looks to me like their sort of maths teacher who's just fed up of the class behaving.
Yeah, exactly. And notice that in the England one, you know, they had recruit 6,500 new teachers, and that's not in the Scottish one. Again, maybe that also would be something that isn't within their power to.
Now you've pointed it out, it is quite noticeable. That's a completely different facial expression.
I know.
On this one. It's as if, oh, nice, caring, cuddly Scotland, and, you know, we'll sock it to you, you wasters in England. That's amazing, isn't it? Fascinating.
There's quite a lot that could be drawn out from these 6 steps. The one I kind of focused on a little bit more was to do with Great British Energy. So this is an interview, a lady called Kate Blake, who's an Aberdeenshire councillor actually, and she's standing as a Labour candidate up there. On the local radio, she's asked quite a gentle question just about, could you say a bit more about GB Energy?
Because we all want to know a bit more about GB Energy.
We do all want to know. So here she goes.
Can you explain a bit more to the listeners about what GB Energy is actually going to be? Because there seems to be some confusion about it. Keir Starmer said that it wouldn't produce any electricity, but yet it's still, we're told it's going to produce tens of thousands of jobs. How do you not produce any energy and yet still produce tens of thousands of jobs?
So GB Energy will be the way that it be a vehicle that we work with private industry as well to create thousands of clean power jobs here in the northeast of Scotland and in Scotland. It's about investing.
Do you even know if the headquarters are going to be here?
We do. We know they will be in Scotland.
Do we know whereabouts in Scotland they're going to be?
We do not know whereabouts in Scotland.
If it's just one great big investment vehicle, what happens if those investments go wrong and, you know, private companies don't do brilliantly with the government money? What happens to the jobs and the transition to net zero then?
Well, there are a number of different strands to this. So obviously there is GB Energy. There is the other things that we're looking at will obviously be around our commitment to upgrade hundreds of thousands of homes, cold and drafty homes. There is obviously the investment in ports, there's the investment in... So there's a number of different strands to this, to how that we will take forward clean energy and deliver lower bills.
Well, I don't know that I'm any the wiser.
Kate wasn't really very clear on that. However, and it's one of these things that there's just been GB Energy, somehow it will mysteriously reduce prices and have lots of jobs, and then it will be this and it will be great. And Kate needs to get a better answer than that. However, we do have a definitive answer from Mr. Starmer. Here he goes. It's very short.
Who would actually be in ownership then of that infrastructure that you're funding in order for GB Energy to actually generate its own energy? Would this be via local authorities? You talked about private sector involvement too, but I'm just trying to clarify the extent to which it would actually be generating its own electricity, and that would all be publicly owned.
Well, no, it'd be an investment vehicle, so not an energy company. So it's an investment vehicle in the energy of the future. The money going into it would be public money, but used to trigger private investment.
It was not what it was promoted as when the energy first came up. But anyway, at least we know that now. And you were saying to me you saw a bit of a parallel between setting that up and Gordon Brown's old private funding initiatives, PFI.
Yeah. No, they're not quite the same thing. But when you think about what he is now expecting, it's not going to create or generate any energy. It's public money going in and then private. Now, we've heard a figure of 75% would be private investment. Now, that is essentially what PFI was about. It was a public-private partnership. The investors put money in and then they expect a sizable reward. And we do know from the PFI contracts that we're still paying for, that have been paid for hospitals several times over the last 20 years. We know how much money can be made for a private sector investment in those kind of vehicles. The public money is going to come from a windfall tax on the oil industry, which we know the oil industry itself is also saying, well, that could lose you up to 100,000 jobs.
Yeah.
So the money which is going in is going to be a quarter of what the investment is, and then the rest is coming from the private sector. So it's just another private sector investment vehicle from what I can see.
Yes, indeed. And okay, it's a lot less than what everyone in Scotland means, and probably the same in Wales as well. When you say publicly owned energy company, we know what we mean by that, and it's not what he's just described.
It's not what he means.
It's not that at all. And I thought, well, okay, it's not that. Basically, it sounds to me that it's a way of priming the pump to loosen up, to access private investment by putting some public money into it. Well, at the very least, surely then we ought to end up owning some of whatever it is. Never heard that stated.
Certainly been in a couple of the manifestos that we've seen on the Indy parties about owning a stake in renewable energy companies in the same way as all sorts of other governments do. Now, we know there are issues that the Scottish government isn't able to own electricity generation because of the Scotland Act, but there are ways around that. But that doesn't seem to be what he's saying. Now, if it was 25% of whatever this green industry is going to be owned by the public and the money will come back to the public and that's how you lower your bills, great. But that's not what they're saying. I do have a clip from somebody more expert than me to explain a bit more about their reservations.
When something sounds too good to be true, and it almost always is in these kind of election discussions, it probably is. The reality is that although bills may have gone down a bit this year, to carry the programme forward that needs to be done for net zero is a huge cost. And it's simply not true that we're all going to benefit from cheap energy anytime soon. And Great British Energy, well, you know, it's another institution in what's now an extremely crowded space. But the telling thing about Great British Energy, for all the noise and the websites, etc., is its budget is absolutely tiny. And what's more, it depends on the oil price staying up because it's going to be paid for by windfall taxes from North Sea oil production. And of course, oil prices can go down as well as up. And there's no explanation of what happens to its funding if the windfall tax turned out not to deliver this relatively small 6 billion or so over the entire Parliament going forward. But the idea that we can get to completely decarbonising the electricity system, and that means either getting rid of the gas, which is about the most important generator of power within 5 years, or completely switch to carbon storage for that gas in that period, is just not plausible. We need a new transmission system in order to bring all this renewables onto the system. It's low density, intermittent, geographically dispersed, etc. And, we haven't really started on that job yet. These things, I'm afraid, take time. And if you try and put 5 bricks on the accelerator and really rush to the deadline, in this case 2030, you're probably going to make it even more expensive than it otherwise would have been.
Interesting. That's interesting. I haven't seen that before. That's very good.
Yeah. Then the other couple of clips I've got is there's a lot of figures being thrown around so far. And although we don't know how any jobs are going to result from an investment vehicle, I mean, that sounds to me like a couple of folk in a corner office with a computer. But
yes, but very high salaries. Now, be fair. They will have very high salaries. Tens of thousands of jobs, lower energy bills. Okay.
And here we've got Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Look at the New Deal for working people. Could you see the Conservatives supporting that?
Hold on, right.
GB Energy, bringing down bills by £1,400 a year, bringing 63,000 jobs to Scotland.
63,000 she came up with, and also she quoted a figure for £1,400 off our electricity bills. Well,
that'd be great.
That would pretty much wipe.
Well, that would wipe ours out. We'd have excess cash at that point.
Yeah, but how is this going to happen? When's it going to happen? It just isn't credible. Yes, GB Energy. I think the jury's well and truly out, because we just don't seem to have any kind of consistent information.
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. As far as I'm concerned, the jury is came back in very quickly and went.
You're right, and even the name rules it out as far as half of Scotland. The other one I've got, Mary Black said something that I just thought, that's a really sensible thing to say.
For a lot of people, I think this election might be their last chance that they give the union, to an extent, because we have had a Conservative government for well over a decade now, and if Labour fail to deliver the level of change that they are promising, then I would expect to see the support for independence begin to rise. And the thing that always frustrates me about this, and particularly, I suppose, more with Labour politicians and party members, is I actually think the unionist parties have the most to gain from independence, because it would allow Scottish Labour to actually be Scottish Labour without having to worry about what's being said or approved down in London. It would allow the Conservatives to sort of sever that toxic sort of connection, or the muscle memory of Thatcher and all the rest of it. Whereas the minute Scotland becomes independent, the SNP served its purpose. That's what I think politics in Scotland could actually be really exciting and really hopeful, and that we would finally have a breakdown of parties who were making promises that they, presuming they win the election, they would have the powers to either deliver on it or not deliver on it.
I think that's a good place to finish. So I hope the various things that we talked about in this episode have been helpful. If it helps put a few things that have been talked about in the media, in the news, if it helps to put those into a wider perspective, I would think that we'd have done a decent job with this. I enjoyed putting it together because I was finding things that I hadn't quite kind of taken on board properly. So I hope everyone else has as well. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks too to our guest, Marion Robertson. If you'd like to watch the video versions of these conversations, you'll find them on our YouTube channel, where we also have a playlist called Election Countdown, which has got all the episodes that we've recorded around the election. So let's see how the final week of the campaign goes. Whatever you do, don't forget to vote on the 4th of July. And don't forget your ID. We'll catch you all later. Bye now.